Today on MuscleCar, our A-body Dodge gets Hemi-fied with a late model monster that was born in Horsepower TV's Dino Cell. And celebrity builder Steve Mank is here to jump in and lend a hand to wedge that blown bad boy into our pro street project.
Well, we've been plugging away at Project Business Time, and we've come to a big fork in the road. This old girl's ready for a power plant, and we knew we had to do something special for this old Mopar. We hollered at the boys down in Horsepower, and we put our noggins together. The solution wasn't just to think outside of the box. We set the box on fire and ran it over with a truck. Telling the tale of this engine requires a good bit of imagination, not to mention a boatload of ingenuity. Arrington Performance is the go-to guys when it comes to late model Chrysler power. They took a modern 6.1 and bored and stroked it to a true 426 cubic inches. Then they did something that nobody has ever done before. They plugged in a YN871 huffer on top of it, along with twin Holley carbs. Keeping it at a reserved 6 pounds of boost, it's knocking on the door of 700 ponies. That should keep it nice and streetable, but it's still plenty mean enough to demand some serious respect in your neighborhood. When it comes time to send her down the track, a pulley swap and some carb rejetting will give us a sizable power boost. But for now, the numbers to remember: late model 426, 871 YN blower. You ain't gonna see very many of these things running around. But I'm gonna need a hand cramming this giant motor off into our car, so I brought in a humdinger. You guys may remember Steve Mank. He's helped out a few times on the Search and Restore show. He gets the pleasure of helping me cram this Frankenmotor off into our Dodge.
And it's a good thing I've been around you Hollywood types before. It'll help me get past some of the sparkle and really get down to doing a good job putting this thing in.
Sparkle? Oh, Steve's been around the block a couple of times. He learned the ins and outs from a couple of guys he worked with at a younger age. Fred and Denny at Lloyd Brothers Automotive, and Chris Dixon of Wounded Knee Motors in Toledo, Ohio. He cut his teeth doing basic stuff and grunt work. Worked in the custom scene for a time, and eventually found himself working with Hollywood Productions and Show Cars Incorporated. He was a part of the team that brought the Batmobile to life for Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. After a few years of touring the festivals with the Batmobile and making personal appearances as RoboCop, seriously, as RoboCop, he had to quit shaking hands and go back to pulling wrenches. In 2000, he followed a cowgirl named Tana and pitched his teepee in Tulsa, where he opened his own shop called Conestoga Motors, which he still runs today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks.
Well, I tell you what, Mr. RoboCop, toss that thing on and see how it fits. And let's see if your bionic arms can help me put in that Hemi.
Well, if you set out to be different, Tom, I'd say you got the job done. But you still need to get all that power from the front of the car to the back of the car, and I think this will do the job nicely for you. TCI has taken a 4L80E transmission and made it adaptable to GM, Mopar, or Ford engines, and has engineered it from a 4-speed into an overdrive 6-speed. The beauty of this unit is that you can throw over 800 horsepower at it, even with its 6 forward gears. The kit comes with the cooler, fluid, and their EZ TCU unit, which we're going to program later on.
As for a torque converter, TCI built us this custom unit specific for our setup. We decided to go with something with a 2800 stall range to keep it fun at the track and still streetable. Now, for all you guys that are sitting at home and are a little bit confused about this stall setup stuff, sit back, let me explain it to you. You see, torque converters are built with one thing in mind: transferring rotational power from the engine to an automatic transmission. They do this by using the engine to turn an impeller with a series of vanes attached to it. When the engine reaches stall speed, the fluid is thrown to the outside of the torque converter body by a centrifugal force and redirected by the vanes in the impeller. The fluid begins to spin a turbine, which is splined into the transmission's input shaft. The stall of the converter simply refers to the engine speed required before the turbine begins to turn the input shaft. This is commonly adjusted by making the converter body smaller and/or changing the pitch of the vanes on the impeller and turbine. To go with those goodies, TCI loaded us up with one of their performance shifters, which helps you hit the right gear in a hurry and look spiffy too. You can run it in automatic, or with these 2 buttons, you can run it through the gears manually.
What do you say we start taking the blower off this thing so we can get it up on the hoist?
Can you do more work than me?
Sometimes, early in the week.
How much does a new Hemi weigh? Stick around to find out and learn about trimming your tranny tunnel to accommodate a big-bodied slush box.
Welcome back, folks. We're going to get this blown Hemi ready to live in our Pro Street Dart. And that involves pulling the huffer off the top so we can get a hold of it with the chain. Before we mate this motor up to the transmission, we decided we wanted to check something out. An original 426 Hemi tipped the scales at around 840 to 845 pounds. I don't care who you are, that's a lot of weight to have in the front end of one of these cars.
Well, I got these scales here, so let's just see how much this late model Hemi weighs. What are you guessing, Mank? This thing's got a lot of aluminum on it.
It's still a Hemi. I'm going to say 575.
You know, that'd be pretty good if it was, considering that other one was, you know, 800 plus, and plus this one's gonna have that blower on top of it.
I think it'd be close.
To 800 or something? See, now you're changing your story.
No, to 575. To 575.
509 pounds without the blower.
Shoo-wee.
What do you guess this thing's gonna weigh? So far, your record's not that great.
I know. Maybe I should just leave it alone and do my job.
635. Still a lot lighter than that old big block.
A little bit more time, then I'll start cranking it, okay? Take her straight down a couple inches, Tom. Okay, good, good, good. Go ahead, go down a little bit. Okay.
Hey, you're under.
Yeah, we're good. Hey, hold it. Hold it. This car had a late model transmission in it when it came here, so it's already been modified a little bit. We're going to get rid of that piece and start making room for that big 4L80 transmission. A body saw is always a good choice for tranny tunnel clearancing because it cuts quickly and there are no sparks flying or being blasted into our nice shiny parts.
We'll hold up the tail shaft with a jack and get to work on our motor mounts. Normally, this Riley Motorsports K member would come with the motor mounts already attached, but we didn't know what kind of motor we were going to be running, so we asked them to send the mounts unattached. Now with the transmission in place, we're ready to build us a cross member. Looks like we're going to need a mount, a piece of tubing, some plate to tie back into these subframe connectors that we put in place. Doesn't look like it'd be too hard at all. The mount that we're using is a Lakewood polyurethane transmission mount. This is a GM style piece, since it's going to be bolting up to a 4L80 transmission case. We're sitting at about 28.
The cross member will be made out of 5/8 120 wall tubing. It's got to be able to stand up to a lot of abuse, so there's no reason not to make sure that it's going to be sturdy. These holes in the mounting plate will allow us to make the unit detachable, so you don't have to pull the motor to get the transmission out of the car.
One little trick to make your life easier, we've clamped a couple of plates to the frame rails to hold up our pieces while we tack everything together. We're also adding some gussets to give the urethane mount a little more stability.
Now that we have the end plates, the transmission mount, and the gussets tacked in place, we're going to go ahead, drop it down, finish weld it on the bench, and then set it back up in there one more time as a test fit. To hold everything in place, I'll drill and tap the frame rails to make a place for the mounting plate bolts, which will allow us to remove the entire unit.
Does it look like that Hemi's missing something? How about that big fatty boo-batty 871 blower? Coming up, this big power adder goes back home.
Well, our Hemi's sitting pretty back in project business time. We're ready to put the cherry back on top of this motor and bolt her down.
As we found out earlier, this cherry weighs better than 120 pounds. And when it's on top of that engine, it's probably going to be a little bit top heavy. But we got plans to build something to keep it nice and stable. Yeah, that is heavy.
Watch your fingernails.
That thing looks awesome, man.
Yeah, this car is going to be one bad animal.
Tell you, with the stance it's got and that blower that could eat a small kid. Do you realize how big the hole is going to be in the hood?
We're going to want to try and keep the torque and the top-heavy nature of this motor from possibly breaking our motor mounts and giving us even bigger problems. One solution to this is to give it a couple more anchor points with engine plates.
There's a few different ways to install an engine plate. Some builders prefer using a mid plate, which bolts in between the motor and transmission, while others like to tie off the front of the block and connect it to a structural component here under the hood. Heck, I've even seen guys use chain and cable and a tie down just to get it to work.
We're going to opt for front motor plates to limit the movement of the engine, which we're going to make from scratch. In order to do that, a good place to start will be with the template. Yeah, my lines are about as straight as a question mark, but a straight edge will help me look a whole lot better. Here's a cool trick. Take the round end of a ball peen hammer and hit the perimeter of the hole to show you where the bolts are going to go. What we're going to do is mount the motor plate to the front of the head using existing hardware holes. Once we've done that, we'll take the other end of the motor plate and connect it to the stock front subframe to mount it to the chassis. The plate itself is going to be borne from some 1/4-inch aluminum plate. You can use steel, but aluminum is way lighter, obviously. Plus it looks real spiffy with the rest of our aluminum top end. Once I pick it back up off the floor, I'll use the belt sander to knock off the stalactites, because when you're in that engine bay pulling on a wrench and slinging your arm across one of those burrs, be ready to grab a box of bandages. I've taken a mounting tab and bolted it to the end of our motor plate. Then we're going to take a standard sway bar bushing assembly and use it as an insulator to cut down on some of the engine's vibration. We've decided to put a couple holes in our piece purely for aesthetic purposes. We're going to try and carry this seam through the car on things such as the front bumper and into our interior panels. Something else to consider. When you have a powerful engine up front, if you don't take the steps to keep it from bouncing around, you're going to end up with a car that's hard to handle. It's going to be hard to dial in your suspension when you have a 1/3 ton of metal up in front of the car bouncing back and forth.
No normal hood's gonna work with a big blower car, but we've got just the thing to make room for it. You're watching MuscleCar. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own MuscleCar collection, delivered right to your door from the PowerBlock.
We've got a lot done today on our Pro Street 74 Dart project business time. Old Steve Mank jumped in to help. He didn't do a whole lot, but hey, we like to have them old Canadians around. But we did pull the blower off, drop the motor into the car, built a cross member, put the blower back on, and built a set of plates to help keep the engine right where it needs to be. Now we're going to get started with putting the hood back on our old Dodge. You guys may remember Steven's performance down in Alabama. We took a ride down there and picked up a couple bucket seats and some bumpers for our old Dodge. And our first hood that we had on it was kind of jacked up. They helped us out with this one, so now we get to start with a clean slate.
Needless to say, this one's going to require its own set of modifications because of the supercharger sticking out of the engine bay. We're hoping to keep this one hinged because removing them would make it a lift-off and hard to handle without a helping hand. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to measure the opening into the engine bay with the hood removed. After we take those measurements, both front to rear and side to side, now that I know the measurements from the furthest point forward on the blower, which obviously is the pulleys and the belt, I'll make a measurement from there to the edge of our hood opening. I'll do the same thing on all 4 sides, and what that'll do is that'll give me a forward-most point, a rear-most point, and the same on the left and right sides. That'll give us a good starting point for the opening hole that we start to cut in the hood for the blower without making it too big or without making it misshaped. We have 2 objects, one being the linkage, the other being the fuel pressure regulator, that are also going to take a little bit of trimming around the hole. So I'm going to make a basic cut to clear both of those items. So we don't have to send Tommy after another hood. I did the old measure twice and hopefully cut only once. We'll see how it comes out.
I'm going to take a couple of these and put them on top of the carburetors to keep any of those metal shavings from falling inside of our motor. Since all this trimming is going to be making a bunch of them. Doesn't quite like that sound. Yeah, we're way off. Yeah, we got to make that a little bigger.
Actually, for our first cut, that's not bad. We just got to make a few cuts here and go out slowly to get our gap for our belt because of the angle, and we should be good to go.
Okay, we're in good shape with the hood. It fits nice and tight around the blower without any big gnarly gaps around it. It's important to take a process like this slow and pay attention to what you're doing, because a bad hack job can ruin the look of a car. And not to mention, once you cut it, it's kind of hard to uncut it.
In the near future, we're going to put some hood pins on it, both for safety and to get us closer to that old school Pro Street look we're looking for. And speaking of looks, we've got one more thing we want to show you guys before we go, just as a little bit of a tease for what's coming up. If you've got any questions about anything you saw on the show today,
go over to PowerBlockTV.com.